real solution to create safe communities. Addressing the national foreclosure rather than reselling developers after community members lose their homes. An institution of just cause laws that ensure that tenants are not forced out of their homes through no fault of their own. One-to-one replacement of any low-income housing that was demolished, for example, the result of Hurricane Katrina, Project 6, HUD, all of those programs are being cut. Passage of a just immigration policy that provides comprehensive legislation and human rights for all. An end to the war in Iraq and other U.S. military aggressors around the world, which combines with economic policies are the root cause that force so many families to migrate to their survivors. And most of all, the right to return and the right to come home for the people of New Orleans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mary Kay. Now we're going to move to a second part of the panel, which Rita is going to begin. Thanks.
Hi. Some recent arrivals. Rita Henley-Jensen, Editor-in-Chief of Women's eNews, which is a daily online news service that you all have to subscribe to. It's free. And then we have the remarkable Liz Abzug. Let's have a round of applause for her. She made it. She's an Obama delegate, so she was a little late. She had a caucus meeting this morning. So thank you, Liz. And Liz is founder of the Bella Abzug Institute. Thank you. And I have the introductions of the other two panels. But first, we should give a shout out to another later arrival. You want to say hello to Ellen Bravo?
Ellen, can I ask you to stand up for a minute? This is Ellen Bravo, who's working so much on policies at the state level that we hope will come to the federal level for working families. And Ellen will be with us. We're going into a breakout session at 1 o'clock. We hope some of you can come, and Ellen will be with us then also to talk about her stuff.
So as founder and editor-in-chief of Women's eNews, I would say what women want is to be heard and to be present, whatever the issue, right? And I think that that's what both of you are talking about. That's the mission of Women's eNews. As I said, it's a daily online nonprofit news service covering issues of particular concern to women. And as it grew out of my personal frustration, and I'm sure many of you experience as well, is that women's issues are not being covered by all the media that you're watching, and so I felt like I should create our own. And as a result of that, I had to ask the question, what then is Women's eNews, and how do we write about it every day? We can't just go to the police department or the Democratic National Convention or the Republican National Convention. And what we discovered is that we need to talk to people like Althea, like Mary Kay, and 3 other people I'm going to introduce. Wait a minute, my cheat sheets are here. The wonderful J.C. Montoya. I hope all of you know her, right? She's executive director of the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights, called CALOR of Colorado. You're a Colorado native and an activist for reproductive justice. Thank you for joining us. We're going to ask you to speak in a minute. And Rita Smith is the other Rita. There's more than one, I know. There's more than 2. But that's how we joke with each other. She's executive director of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and she and I have been working on and off together for, let's not even go there, but many years. And let's see, 92 is when the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence was formed, and you're both, that's when you came in, sorry. And you both do advocacy and you work for social change, because otherwise it just doesn't work. Liz Abzug, you're a human rights activist. You're a lawyer. You had an incredible, close personal relative who was an incredible leader for all of us in the 60s and the 70s. And Liz is carrying on that tradition, and she'll try to connect the dots for us. All of you got a copy of the memo, and the memo is created by Women's eNews as an effort to really say, it's not just one thing. It came out of my frustration covering, listening to the primary discussions, the panels, the forums, and all of that, and feeling that none of the candidates had gotten the memo about the status of women and what's going on with us. As editor-in-chief, I thought I knew. But I thought, hey, I'm going to do some quick research. We had a panel coming up, and I was stunned. I brought that back to our editorial meeting, and as we started to talk about it, we go, you know, we have to make sure that everybody gets the memo about what's going on with women's wages, the barriers to women's employment, poverty. Whoops, we're losing somebody. Reproductive health, violence, and homophobia. It's a system, and we use the word sexism or feminism, and sometimes falls a little flat, feels a little old from the 60s, 70s. We're so tired of talking about this. So we're not, because it's a system, and we can't work on just one aspect. And Women's eNews has the joy, the opportunity, and the beloved work of being able to interview and publish the words, the ideas, and the actions of the people on this panel with the support of the Ms. Foundation, too. Thank you. So, all right, so where should we start? Why don't we start with violence? Rita, what's up with violence against women nationwide?
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. It's really important that you get what we say out to other people. So share this information. It's good information. Domestic violence impacts 1 in 4 women in the country, in this country. It is also internationally an enormous problem. The United Nations, UNIFEM, has taken this on as an issue because it impacts everybody. They've done studies. It's just enormously important. If we're going to have safe communities, we have to have safe homes. 1 in 3 million women in this country are physically assaulted each year. Females aged 20 to 24 are actually at the highest risk. So it starts very early. As a matter of fact, I just recently read a study that says tweens are actually experiencing physical violence in relationships. So if you have children, pay attention. Pay attention to what they're experiencing. Help them understand what healthy relationships are about, because we have to stop this interpersonal violence if we want to stop community violence. About 1/3 of female homicide victims that are recorded in police records are killed by intimate partners. So it's a huge cause of death for women, probably one of the highest causes of death for women in this country. And the cost of domestic violence through loss in workplace, health care, is about $5.8 billion a year. So we can impact all of our lives positively if we reduce violence in the home. The impact on children is phenomenal. It impacts them in huge ways. You can survive domestic violence, but you can't ever forget it. So it's something that we need to really help other people start to learn not to do. And men have a really particularly important role in this. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence was formed in 1978, so we're celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. We've made enormous progress over those 30 years. We've gotten laws passed, we've gotten people who have been very supportive. Senator Joe Biden has been an enormously powerful advocate within the congressional delegation to help us get the Violence Against Women Act passed, and a real champion on this issue. So we need people at all levels, community levels, all the way up to the national levels. But I think it's really important that we start to recognize that men can actually help us stop this violence. Men can talk to other men. Men can say, this is not acceptable. It's not acceptable in my neighborhood. It's not acceptable in my community. It's not acceptable in my church. It's not acceptable in my family. And if you do that, you can help reduce the amount of violence that women and children experience in this country. And I think you have a really important part in that, and I welcome you to learn more about this issue. As they were talking about in terms of Katrina, the impact on women and children and families after that devastation is enormous, particularly around violence. What all research seems to show is that after a disaster, domestic violence increases. The need for services, the need for help, the violence increases. And the problem is that in New Orleans and in the Gulf Coast area, those services were not available. And 3 years later, the domestic violence program in New Orleans has finally started to provide bed space. So for 3 years, they haven't had a place to shelter women who've had needs. So I think it's really important that we recognize what we can do to impact this. The impact on Native American women, both domestic violence and sexual assault, is enormously higher than any other population. So in terms of reservations and urban Indians, we really need to do something different about that issue. And I just want to close with recognizing that within the last day or two, one of the pioneers of this effort, the first woman who ever wrote a book about domestic violence in this country, her name is Del Martin, passed away. Very huge loss, both in GLBT advocacy as well as domestic violence movement. So I just wanted to recognize her and just say that those of you who are younger, who have an interest in social change work, domestic violence is a really wonderful, powerful place to be, and we can make enormous changes that will impact every facet of our community. Safer homes means safer communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. The Del Martin connection, I'm a former battered woman and a former welfare mother, and I read Del Martin's book in the 70s, and it's so hard, I think, for some of us to make the connection between the violence against women and homophobia. But I'll just mention one part of our memo. The highest proportion of people expelled from the military in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, under that policy, are people accused of lesbians. What we're often told is that if you don't go along with the program that your commanding officer is asking, whatever that program might be, you're accused of being a lesbian. And so I think it's really important for us, and that's what Del Martin stands for, is connecting all the dots and a real loyalty among all of us. And that's one of the issues, and sort of the way you approach your work in Colorado, as I understand. JC, will you want to start talking now about your work here in Colorado?
Sure. I'm really honored to be here with the Ms. Foundation, Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights, or COLOR, along with the Ms. Foundation, has been a leader in bringing together all of the issues that affect women. None of us live these issues in silos, and especially young women, women of color, poor women, and transgender and lesbian women are impacted by the issues my colleagues talked about today in different ways and with a greater intensity. COLOR and our allies use a reproductive justice frame to look at the freedom and liberties for women. We talk about economic justice, GLBT rights, immigrant rights, economic justice, freedom from violence, and criminalization of women and families, among a multitude of other issues. This year in Colorado, we have a very unique opportunity to look at multi-issue organizing to ensure that the rights and opportunities for young women and people of color are protected. There are two amendments that'll be on the November ballot. Amendment 48, the Personhood Initiative, would define a fertilized egg as a person in our Constitution. We also have Amendment 46, which would eliminate equal opportunity and affirmative action for women, girls, and people of color. COLOR is working in collaboration with our allies, not just to talk about abortion rights, but to talk about the large variety of implications this have, both of these initiatives, for women's health and opportunity. We're looking at issues like the impact on women's health, the interference of the government in personal family decision-making, and the right of families to do what's right for themselves, based on their circumstances and their values, not based on something imposed from the government. Our work to defeat Amendment 48 is combined with our work to defeat Amendment 46. We want the state to do what's right for all families, and Latino families, African American families, and what's right for women and families is right for everyone in our state. So we're saying vote no against Amendment 48 to protect the health and well-being of women and families. Vote no on Amendment 46 to ensure that young women and people of color have educational opportunities and job opportunities. And what's really interesting is our campaign is designed to resonate with Latinos specifically. But when we've reached out to our social justice allies in the economic justice and labor movements, in immigrant rights movements, when we talk about multiple issues instead of just one issue, we get allies. People who aren't able to say that abortion rights is their main focus are able to say that protecting the health of women is important. Protecting the right of families to make private decisions is important. And so we've gone from being a Latino-based campaign to really being a social justice campaign. And that's what it's all about. I think each of our colleagues today have talked about the issues that impact us. You know, I'm not just a woman, I'm a woman of color. I'm not a woman of color, but I come from a poor family who experienced domestic violence. All of those things together create who I am and create what policies I need and what women want our politicians to be focused on. It's working together, doing what's best for women, which is also what's best for the community at large, and not working in our single issue silos, realizing that reproductive justice isn't just a convenient way to organize our community, it's also an effective way to win elections. And so we're hoping that here in Colorado, our experiment, our test of showing that we can talk about more than one issue at one time, and people get it, and they want to do what's right for their families, can then show our colleagues in South Dakota, in California, and across the nation that we need to work together. We need to work cross-issue, and with that, we'll do what's right for families and what's right for women and men and our entire society. I'll pass it back over to Rita.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I hope most, if nothing else, comes out of this discussion as we get a much more coverage on the national and local issue of the two propositions, right? I learned about them. As I said, I'm editor-in-chief of Women's eNews, but who knew? It's so hard to know all that's going on and keep track of it. But you mentioned something very significant. If we work across issues, what do we need, Liz? We need leaders. And that's Liz's business, the Bella Abzug Leadership Institute. And you work on both the local, you have a great local program, and a national level. So, Liz, will you take the mic? Yes, you got it.
I want to thank the Ms. Foundation, Sara Gould, and for hosting this, and Women's eNews, Rita Henley-Jensen. You know, the last person who speaks always has the problem, but try to not be redundant and to sort of give respect to all my fine sisters that are on the stage here. I just want to share something. I had a mother, Congresswoman Bella Abzug. She was one of the leaders, in my view, of the feminist movement of the 20th century. She was a congresswoman, for those of you who don't know, from 1970 to 1976, and had a lot to do with a lot of the women's rights legislation, Title IX, and fighting in the Congress of the United States when it was very difficult to do so, along with her colleagues, other women in the Congress. But here's the thing. You've heard from amazing presentations on domestic violence, on reproductive rights, and how we need to cross-sectorally, as women and men, fight for the rights of half the population of this country. You've heard from women who have struggled, who are working in the trenches in New Orleans to deal with some of the worst devastation and yet the most empowering moments, I think, for your community in a certain way, in anything we've seen in our history, our recent history in this country, in terms of the devastation that happened to your community and the people, and loss of housing and loss of dignity, and this failure of this government to address it and to cut back. all the necessary services that are needed for people's daily lives to exist. And it had a terribly disproportionate impact on the African American community in New Orleans. And we salute you for fighting and pulling the mandate together to try to bring the resources that are so needed to rebuild and to grow the community there. I just want to say that I came out of the convention as an Obama delegate for New York City, New York State. And I am a woman who is sort of sees things like the rest of my sisters here in a global and in a sort of interconnected way. I happen to be one of the things I do, I teach at the college level, women in leadership and urban studies at Columbia University and Barnard College. But I want to implore you, all of you sitting here, the women and the men that are listening to us today, that this agenda we have a lot of cleanup work to do and unfinished business as women in this country, and our pro-feminist men and our feminist men who work by our sides. What I mean by that is that we don't have equal pay. We have terrible violence against women. We have horrible homophobia that exists in this country. We have a disproportionate number of women and children who are the poor in this country. We have terrible health care and elder care benefits, daycare benefits, as we know, that don't provide for all of our families. And the truth is, we are also still not recognized citizens in the U.S. Constitution as being half of the population of this country, equal rights for equal women. And I am somewhat frustrated. I'm going to share something with you as a woman who's gay, who's Jewish, who's an activist, a daughter of one of the key leaders of the 20th century, as a woman who gave a lot of my time and spends a lot of my time on helping to develop women leaders across this country, young women, and being the daughter of Bella Abzug, putting all this together in terms of a framework. And I always think we always have to put things together, as these women, all my colleagues have said here. Here's the problem. We talk among ourselves. We know that our agenda is unfinished. We know that we are still earning women 70 cents on the dollar that men earn. We know that we are not half, even though we are more than half of the voters in this country. At this moment, women constitute 52% of the voters in this country. Our interests are still not represented at parity to the other gender. Now, my mother used to say, women and men have been doing things in pairs since Noah's Ark. All right? And I really believe that we have an enormous opportunity now. Look, the feminist movement and the civil rights movement through the candidacies of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, after 40 years of struggle for both the civil rights movement and the feminist movement, a little less in years in terms of the modern feminist movement, we're coming together now. We are coming together. We can't lose this election, and it's a very close election. Why? You all heard why. I don't have to repeat that because there have been a lot of speeches, and we're reading it in the papers every day. But the women in this country have the greater stake and also, in my view, the greater responsibility, whatever age, whatever background, whatever color, to come to the polls. Why? Truthfully, men, we are the most reliable voters. And I'm here not just saying this as an Obama delegate because I'm saying it as an activist, as a feminist, as someone who is gay, who tells you that, and someone who believes in family, whatever families you are in, and believes very strongly in that. And families with my sisters in New Orleans and my other African-American sisters across the country and my Latino sisters and others, Asians, that it isn't going to happen unless we get this Democratic ticket into the White House. And Biden, who is one of the writers of the Violence Against Women Act, we're lucky, women, because this man really gets it. And so does Obama, you know. But the thing is, our agenda is not even going to get completed and attained, and I'm talking about whether it's daycare, all the things we care about, unless we take back the power from people that have oppressed women and men in this country for the last 8 years. And I really want to say, I implore you, and this is, again, not as a delegate for Obama, this is as a citizen and a feminist and a woman who understands, like the rest of you, that we have been terribly oppressed. We have women and men in this country, working people, middle class, you all know that. We have lost so much of our daily existence, the quality of our lives, both domestically and internationally. And these women sitting up here, these women who are leading the fights up here, as well as all of you, women and men who are in the room, we need to take back our rights and to create and to finally finish the business that has not been achieved, particularly for women in this country who make up half of the population and who, listen guys, we got to share the power. And it is time that we now have a possibility and the greatest opportunity in the last 20 years to be able to do that. And I want very strongly to say that in the New York delegation, in closing, the Hillary delegates and the Obama delegates and all the elected officials and most of the New York delegation, the electeds, were obviously for our Senator Hillary Clinton. I myself faced a lot of conflict about that as a feminist, as someone who's worked for women and continues in every way, tries to get women elected. But I also felt that it's time to get some new ideas. I think a great ticket would have been Obama and Hillary. It just didn't work out for all the reasons that we've talked amongst ourselves. But in the end of the day, it's the groups, it's us as citizens, women, us in our various spheres of concern in our families, and joining together and supporting one another in coalition with men, with people, men who and bringing in new men. And don't be afraid to say you're pro-feminist or feminist men, and to really try to finally conquer this so that women are true equal citizens in this country. And finally, I'll just say, the last thing I want to say is, for the gay and lesbian GLBT community, there's a lot of hope as well. There's hope because there's a Marriage Equality Act that's been, is moving along. There's hope also because we have agenda, which is a Gender Employment Non-Discrimination Act that we believe we can bring back. And right before I came here, I saw Congresswoman Louise Slaughter from New York, who was one of the persons who've worked on fair pay, equal pay for 40 years in our state and in the Congress. And she said to me, Liz, if we get them in, we're going to have them sign this bill. But we may have to start all over rephrasing it, new terminology, because the Democrats, but we will get this bill. So I want to thank everybody and all of you for your contributions and for Ms. for holding this today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you so much. Who better to talk about so many of the issues that women still face in our country than Liz Abzug? So I really thank you so very much. And just want to wrap up in the 1 minute that we have remaining by saying Liz did such a great job about talking about the issues, but we've also been saying that it's not just the issues that women face, it's the issues that the entire country is facing, and that the role that women's leadership will play in moving this country forward. And I want to cite a new study just released by the National Women's Law Center in Washington, D.C., a couple of their findings. The poll was conducted by Peter Hart Research Associates. Women are significantly more pessimistic than men in their attitudes about the status quo in America. There is a movement for change that is felt by women particularly. And then I would wrap up by saying more than half of women feel that the government should do more to solve problems and to help people meet needs. And I think this is one of the largest themes we have in our country right now, is regaining people's confidence in government and people's belief that government can provide solutions and does play a very important role. So I want to thank all of our people here who came to be part of this morning, who are such important leaders and advocates in the women's movement, and all of you for coming as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wasn't it fantastic? And it was being streamed live, and it's on the Women's eNews site, and it's on the Ms. Magazine. I did it. I know better. The Ms. Foundation site. We will be taking questions on the 5th floor of the Alliance building right next door. Right. And we have free T-shirts. We have the memo, and feel free to take extra copies because everybody needs to get the memo, including guys. If you see a guy, maybe even scanning it, make sure he takes it home, and let's see each other up on the 5th floor. Thank you so much. And subscribe to Women's eNews. Bye.